get. We will be opening it up to questions and everything as well. So I encourage you throughout the session, I'm going to ask Evelyn a series of questions, but if you have any questions that you would like us to answer, please use the Q&A box, because I'll be following along that rather than the chat box, because they sometimes get lost in the chat box. So you should be able to see the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, just to the left-hand side if you're looking at it. So please, we encourage you to ask questions, raise any concerns, issues or hot topics that you might have, as this is as much about you as it is about us sharing information as well. So firstly, before we get started, Volunteering SA acknowledges the traditional owners of the land on which we meet throughout Australia, and we recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures, and to elders both past and present. So let's get started. Welcome everyone. So very exciting today to have Volunteering SA&NT CEO Evelyn O'Loughlin here to chat with us. So firstly, Evelyn, what a week it has been here in particular in South Australia.
Yeah, I know. It's, yes, we started off a few weeks ago really quite comfortable and thinking how lucky we are in South Australia and of course in the Northern Territory with the low number of cases, and generally only from COVID cases and people coming in from overseas. And then all of a sudden that's all been turned on its head, and it's been very topsy-turvy. And it's really hard in terms of, you know, standing up volunteers, or, you know, do we keep our programs going, and do we even go to the office? Do we stay at home? And we, you know, as you know, Emily, we've started off, let's go back, and we were in lockdown, so we have to work from home. Then we went back to the office on Monday, only to find out at Monday lunchtime it was suggested quite strongly that we all go back to working from home if we could. So even for our own organisation, we've you know, and our service hasn't stopped. We're just delivering it differently, but it is a very unsettling time for people, particularly those that have client-facing programs that have to deliver services to vulnerable people. And, you know, how do you do that, and how do you do it safely? So these are really important issues for us to be looking at.
Absolutely. And just on that as well, Evelyn, with the term essential services, do volunteers fall under that definition of what an essential worker is in South Australia particularly?
Yeah, a good question, and one that we now do have an answer for. So part of my role and many other CEOs in the human services or the community services part of the not-for-profit sector and the peak bodies meet with the CEO of DHS and her team as part of DHS's sector intelligence gathering group around COVID. And we've been meeting, well, initially we were meeting a couple of times a week back earlier in the year, but we still meet now, and we met just last week. And one of the questions that came up is, what is the definition of an essential worker, and does it include a volunteer? And that information now has been absolutely clarified, and yes, it does. And we'll share with people on the as part of the webinar. We can send them through links to information where that's specified and what an essential worker is. And basically, it's really, you know, those with those outward-facing roles that are supporting vulnerable people in our communities, whether they are people that are aged, people with disabilities, people that may be at risk of, you know, harm through domestic violence, or, you know, really the people that are the most vulnerable are the ones where essential workers will need to continue their work. And that does include volunteers. And the other thing that was clarified, it also includes the manager or the supervisor of those essential workers. They're all considered essential to delivering those services.
That's great. Thanks for clarifying. I know there's been some questions coming through in the sector about that. And does it also apply to emergency services? So your CFS, your SES and things like that, should we touch wood, hopefully nothing happens, but if there was a bushfire or anything as well?
Yeah, they absolutely are classified as essential workers. And the other thing that's been interesting in terms of, I don't know if people have seen it, I think it was this morning came through, that if you're staying at home because you're quarantining as part of this cluster, and there is a bushfire, you are allowed to leave. That came through from SA Health earlier this morning, the clarifications around not staying at home if your property or your own personal safety is at risk. So that's been good to see that clarification, because a couple of days' time, or tomorrow, we'll be at 40 degrees in Adelaide, and also on Saturday. So those are the times of risk, particularly with bushfires in our community, as we saw around this time last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Fingers crossed and touch wood, hey, that nothing happens.
That's it.
Yeah. And I should say, as Evelyn mentioned, we will email you all the resources from today. So don't need to worry. We'll send you out and email you a link to all the resources we talk about throughout this session as well.
Yeah.
Evelyn, whilst the Northern Territory is not currently under the same restrictions as South Australia, is what we're talking about today still relevant? As I know we've got a few people from the Northern Territory joining us. So
yeah, it is absolutely relevant. And people in the NT, as in South Australia, I'm sure are very familiar with all the places to go. But I thought I'd quickly just, if I could, just do a little screen share.
And while you're doing that, Evelyn, I'll just take note that what we'll do is we'll go through some of our questions, and then we'll attend to the Q&A box once we've gone through, because we might end up answering some of the questions with what we've prepared for today anyway. So
yeah, so people in the NT will be familiar, I'm sure, with this NT government website, where they have a lot of information about travel restrictions and different other things that apply, particularly for COVID, people returning into the Northern Territory or travelling in. And of course, we had that dilemma just last week where South Australians had to quarantine for 2 weeks if they returned in from to the Northern Territory from South Australia. And I know that affected even one of our employees' travel arrangements back into Adelaide. So these things have now changed again. So, you know, there is a lot of current up-to-date information on that website. And of course, you know, there is the equivalent around in SA Health, but also with the Department of Human Services. And one of the things that we were looking at, Emily, when we were sort of putting this together, is some of those programs around vulnerable people, which I'll stop sharing that now, but we can talk about in a moment.
Absolutely. Thanks, Evelyn. That's great. So you sit on the Sector Intelligence Group with DHS here in South Australia. So what have been some of the key discussion points in relation to the sector, and following on from, you know, the essential worker and volunteer definition?
I think it's been absolutely fantastic that we have an avenue to feed in information from all of the community services area directly into DHS, to their CEO, who is part of all of the decision making and can feed into SA Health the matters that are of concern. So right at the beginning, you know, those questions about PPE, you know, you might remember back in March, April, that we didn't have PPE everywhere. People didn't know how to use it. So being able to feed back that information, and one of the really wonderful things we saw was how business, government, the not-for-profit sector, everyone came together in a really collaborative way, not only with sharing information, but trying to resolve the situations we found ourselves in. And South Australian Business Debt Mould was asked if they could retool and start to make face masks. That's just one example. And I'm pretty sure I saw the figures that their capacity is thousands a day. And isn't it really fantastic? And I'm really proud that, you know, through a connection to someone, to another person, all of a sudden our own supply of face masks was able to be, supplemented so that we weren't at the mercy of not having equipment, just by people pitching in and doing something different to what they would ordinarily do. And of course, in the not-for-profit sector, we have so many different programs and people and vulnerable people that we're supporting, and also with the environment as well. And to be able to feed that in as peers to people working in government has been an extraordinary thing to be part of. Really the groups are quite large, and everyone has a turn to be able to feed in any concerns or to ask any questions. So we were then able to disseminate the peak bodies, and the not-for-profit CEOs, able to disseminate that information to spread it far and wide. And one of the really good things we saw was the collaboration between the peak bodies as well. For example, Volunteering SA&NT and Community Centres SA, we work together to deliver some webinars, because different groups of people will connect in with different organisations and hear different messaging or be part of different questions that are being asked. So I'm really proud of how everybody's worked together. It's been an extraordinary effort by not only government, and we've seen the effort of the Premier and the Commissioner for Police and Professor Spurrier. And you can imagine what's going on behind the scenes to be able to get those three leaders to come together collaboratively and really keep us safe. It's been extraordinary.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree. And just on masks, is there something that's available now to those to the clients in our sector?
Yeah, so let me just do another screen share. Just bear with me a moment. I am getting better at this, but...
Well, yeah. What a year, hey, we've all had learning how to adapt and embrace technology so quickly, I think, which has been fun.
That's it. I think I've got it now. Let me just do the screen share. So one of the pieces of information that has come out of a most recent sector intelligent meeting is that there will be, and I've just really got the text there from that's come through from DHS, is that they're working with, DHS is working with SA Health to distribute packs to members of the community to help them comply with the request to wear mask while the risk of community transmission remains. The packs are for the community. They're not there to be used as a replacement for PPE for your own agency or organisation. In the packs there are, they're below, and I mentioned earlier Detmold, the South Australian business that has started developing these from really now well over 6 months ago. And there is a form that organisations can fill out if they are interested in receiving face masks. Minimum of 1 box of 960 masks can be ordered, and it's a one-off order. So we're happy to share that information if that's of value to organisations to get masks out to the community rather than to their own workforce.
Yeah, that's great. And we should say, shouldn't we, that you can actually sign up for the DHS newsletters that come out.
Yes. Yeah, Lois Boswell, as CEO or CE, has been communicating very regularly, and it's really great to have information that's absolutely tailored to what we need to know in the community services sector, particularly, which is where a lot of volunteering is done. Mm-hmm. And the information is really pertinent, including that piece that we just saw there in relation to face masks.
Great, thanks, Evelyn. So, as we've said, it's been a bit of a challenging year, but I'd like to hear from you, Evelyn. What do you think are the key points to really acknowledge and I guess think about when it comes to managing volunteers and how to do so according to best practice, going forward?
Yeah, see, the difficulty is people may not often show their worries or their stress or their anxiety. But often it is within people, and particularly in times of where things are different, things have changed, and you don't know what the future holds. So, we always would recommend people, reflect back on a number of sort of key things, including the national standards for volunteer involvement, which are really a useful tool. I know people are really familiar with them, but they do give great guidance as to maybe some of the things that you should be considering in terms of how do you involve your volunteers in decision making. You know, how do you balance some people who want to come to the office and keep volunteering, or to your premises where you're delivering your volunteer services, to those that actually are in the at-risk group, or don't, for other reasons. They may be connected to people in at-risk group, or for whatever reason don't want to continue their volunteering. So the things to keep in mind are people's mental health and psychological well-being, and when you connect in to different videos that are online, or services that you see that are available, and support networks that are out there, you can't tell always what's going on from the outside. And it's really knowing your people, knowing your team, knowing your workforce well, picking up the phone, talking to people, asking really pertinent questions. And of course, that's guidance that we can help with in terms of the sorts of things that you can ask, because we've been doing that ourselves. We've got, people may not know, but we've got over 100 volunteers that volunteer with Volunteering SA&NT in different programs, both in South Australia and the Northern Territory. And our paid employees are sort of around 20 people. So we absolutely rely on volunteers for our service delivery, and they are a critical part of our organisation. So it's talking to people, keeping them informed, and listening, really active listening, and connecting them into support services. Hopefully organisations have the employee assistance programs available to volunteers as well. If you don't, it may be something that you may wish to talk with others in your organisation to make it accessible to all of the workforce in your organisation. Of course, there are, for completely volunteer-run organisations, that may not be an option, but there are other services, and we're always here as Volunteering SA&NT to be able to support and direct and answer questions as best as we can. Now, there were some other things too, Emily, can you?
Yeah, so we were also, for some of you that would have sat in on our webinars earlier in the year, we talked a lot about planning and risk management when it comes to returning volunteers to the workplace. And we've since come across some really good resources again. Evelyn, do you want to talk a bit about the Safe Work Australia? And
So quite some time ago, back in probably 2012, Safe Work Australia really started to focus on resources for volunteers. And some of you might have been around that time when they came out and how work health and safety legislation applied to volunteers. And I am going to do another screen share because Safe Work Australia has now developed more resources for volunteers and for volunteer involving organisations. And it's really terrific to see that, that they're continuing this great work. And just to go down, there's a whole, every one of these sections here is a link to more documentation and more information. And, do volunteers have any work health and safety duties in relation to COVID-19? That's a fantastic question, and great resources in there for you to be able to go in and have a look. And you may be aware that the legislation in South Australia and from my best knowledge in the Northern Territory is harmonised with the federal legislation. So these resources will be relevant to you, but you can also check in with the relevant bodies in the Northern Territory and South Australia, the relevant work health and safety government agencies like Safe Work SA and
VSA&NT, I think.
VSA&NT in the Northern Territory. So, and here we go, the model laws are the laws that cover the whole of the country. And of course, the only time that volunteers aren't covered by those is unless there are no paid workers. So the organisation is not what's classified as a PCBU. and a PCBU, if you can see there, is a person conducting a business or undertaking. And generally that's taken to mean that there's somebody that's employed. So completely voluntary run organisations are not covered, but best practice, if people were interested in making sure that their programs and volunteers were, programs were run as best as possible and their volunteers safe, you would be able to follow these particular instructions and advice that's here. You know, what should a PCBU do if a volunteer contracts COVID? Great question. And there's some information there. You know, they're not covered by workers' compensation. However, you may, if you sign up to Volunteering SA&NT's fortnightly V-News newsletter, you may see that there is advocacy going on at the state and territory peak body level with Volunteering Australia, with the Insurance Council and the federal government, you know, to see what we can do to protect volunteers in these challenging times where we have not come across these types of scenarios before. So that's a really good place to be able to find information about risks. And I think we had another one, didn't we, Emily?
Yeah, the national, well, we did talk about, for those that know as well, I'm always talking about the Justice Connect's not-for-profit law page. So not only do they have really great useful resources, particular and specific to volunteer management, but also some of those other legal governance stuff that you might have questions about in your organisation as well. So again, we'll send that link through, but we've also got, in terms of risk assessment and risk management templates and information, we still have our COVID tab on our website. So make sure you keep an eye on that. We'll be uploading some of the new resources as well again.
Yep.
But yeah, thanks, Evelyn. This is exactly it. This is brilliant, that not-for-profit law page. So definitely get on board, and they can help you with some of the legal aspects that we can't always answer for you. So.
And what I'll do just now very quickly again is just do a very quick screen share of our own website, because it is really simple to find the information. It's just here on COVID-19 update, and hopefully that has that moved across? Can you see?
That's on there. That's great.
And so we do have quite a few fact sheets and also risk assessment templates, and key considerations around COVID-19 risk assessment for volunteering programs, a number of fact sheets both for South Australia and the Northern Territory, and also some national resources there, and which we do continue to update regularly.
Absolutely. Thanks, Evelyn. And you know, we always say that if you haven't returned volunteers or it's quiet time in your office, you know, use it to plan, use it to get ahead of policies, procedures, you know, consult with your volunteers in that program, you know, or in your organisation. You might want to update a whole range of your resources and your behind the scenes forms and whatnot. So it's a great time to get ahead of some of that stuff as well, and utilise the volunteers in those things if you haven't necessarily before. They might be open to reviewing documents for you. So
yes, sorry, and I was going to say, and don't forget, you can always advertise for a skilled volunteering position to help you with that through Volunteering SA&NT's database, or, you know, if you connect in with Northern Volunteering or Southern Volunteering or Limestone Coast Volunteer Resource Centre. You know, we've all got ways of advertising roles. And you may want to get a very specialist role to come and help you to help you become more COVID prepared, or assess your risks, do a risk management assessment, develop, as Emily said, policies and procedures. Believe it or not, there are people out there that love doing this. It's great when you can use skilled expertise to help you in your programs.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And if you're doing it through us, it's a free service. So that's for anyone in the NT or South Australia. So you just need to have a couple of insurances. But again, that information's on our website as well. So definitely. So one of the questions we've had emailed through to us prior to today's session was, I'll just summarise it now for you, Evelyn. So from this person's perspective, they see a lot of opportunities, particularly on social media during a crisis. that seem to gather a collection of volunteers for this sort of work around crisis and emergency volunteering. Do you see this impacting on volunteering now or into the future for organisations that offer more traditional types of volunteering, and would be interested in your thoughts?
Yeah, look, again, an excellent question. And I do believe there will be an impact. And I'm just going to share another screen in just a second, because I think that this article that I'm going to share with you, some of you may have already seen it, but it is from The Guardian in the UK, and it does relate to what happened initially in the UK when the call out went for volunteers to support the NHS. And I'm sure many of you would have seen those beautiful videos of people clapping and thanking all of the volunteers. But imagine how you deal with 1 million volunteers. They had, what did they have? 700, and it just says here, 750,000 people signed up to using the phone app, 3 times as many people as were expected. And then, of course, the volunteer resource centres or support centres have registered approximately another 250,000 people. And that was, when is the date of this article? The 14th of April. So at the time, that was extraordinary what happened. Of course, we had a similar, each state and territory has different arrangements with their state and territory governments. In South Australia, we have a formal deed of agreement where if there's a request for volunteers to support in recovery for bushfire or for other emergencies, and even in the COVID situation, we are what's called, stood up, we are activated. And we then start to, all the messaging that comes from media, from government, from ourselves, as the central point of call for people to be able to register to volunteer if they want to in that recovery situation. We didn't actively advertise that this time round because circumstances were different. The circumstances were that many programs actually were suspended and volunteers were stood down. So the need was variable. Some organisations, we heard it in the media, Meals on Wheels and Food Bank and Red Cross and others with those vulnerable client-facing programs where a lot of their own volunteers may have been older and were in that vulnerable group themselves, needed help and needed help quickly. They were inundated. Other organisations still haven't gone back to their volunteering programs in the same way as they were pre-March this year. So what is the impact of those call-outs? We saw in Queensland the equivalent of, the original mud army that they had with the floods. They had the care army. I think they had something like 20,000 people this time round for COVID registered to volunteer. It is a balance. So what is the impact? The question was, what could we foresee being the impact on programs? Well, imagine if you put your name forward and you weren't contacted. Imagine if you put your name forward and you said, look, I'm giving of my time and talent and skills freely, and there's no role for me. I think that it's a risk that we have to be aware of, that people may then be a little bit disenchanted that they haven't been offered any position. Now, I can't imagine that there were in the UK 1 million volunteering roles for people, and it would be very interesting to know how many of those people actually were given a useful role, and was it in the first few weeks? Was it in the, is it continuing? Because we know in recovery, in bushfire recovery particularly, that can take years. So sometimes we won't promote a role immediately, but a role may come up, 6, 12 months later, when the community itself is starting to recover and looking for different things in order to, to strengthen and become more resilient. So, did 20,000 people find roles with the care army in Queensland? I haven't heard any data on that yet, but it is something that I'm interested in. So in answering your question, I think the balance is there about a massive call out for help if we don't have roles for people to undertake. And then the other risk of that is, let's say we have roles, how do we manage all those people? Do we have people that are trained or in their profession is leading volunteers or managing volunteers? Do we have to upskill people? Do we, how do we do all of that managing? Because that's the crunch. How do you build your surge capacity in your organisation? So one day you've got 200 volunteers, the next day you've got 1,000. How do you manage that? And they are critical questions that organisations, again, going through their risk matrix, can have solutions to, or at least a plan for solutions to some of those issues.
Great, thank you, Evelyn. I think that, that also leads into my next question, that what do you think will be some of the emerging trends in terms of volunteering, and particularly the types of roles that will exist for volunteers going forward?
I think we've seen with social media becoming more and more well utilised, people will start their own campaigns and their own ways of solving an issue without necessarily understanding that there are other structures and, other...
more formalised.
Yeah, more formalised arrangements in place. And if those add value, that's fantastic. But how do we get messaging out? It's that balance about before saying, oh, look, let's promote, let's say we're in Queensland, let's promote the Care Army, and everybody knows the Care Army is there. And so that may then change how people approach starting something in their own neighbourhood or in their own area, to a more conservative approach where we don't want to build up people's expectations only for them to be disappointed that there aren't any roles, but then people may not know that things are happening and therefore create their own momentum in their own communities. So I think that with the advent of social media, it is something that we've got to keep on top of. It's getting consistent messaging out and being sure that people's desire to help, their beautiful, wonderful human desire to help, is used effectively and doesn't inadvertently, through their goodwill, create issues down the track that people may not be aware of. So I think we've tried really hard to get that consistent messaging out across government, media, and through Volunteering SA&NT and the volunteer support services and other organisations about what we should be doing in the time of crisis. And that's why, going back to where we started, Emily, that's why that sector intelligence gathering group has been phenomenal, because we can all be on the same page, and in a half an hour meeting we can all be updated, and issues can be raised and can be dealt with quickly and easily.
Yeah.
So some of the other trends we know, of course, are virtual volunteering, and I remember, and I'm not sure who's on the webinar, but those who were around a few years ago when we ran a session with the local government, a conference with the local government community sector managers, and I hopefully got that name right, and also local government volunteer managers network. And we had a speaker at the time who challenged the audience to think about roles that suited the volunteer more than they suited the organisation at face value. And that was quite challenging, because people had fixed roles and the volunteer has to fit that fixed role. But we have come a long way in the last 10 years looking at a particular volunteer and looking at their skill set and how we can actually utilise their particular skill set, even if we don't have a role for them as part of our existing set of roles. So we know that skills-based volunteering is really becoming more and more evident, and people can often do that through electronic means. And we've all moved across to the platform of Zoom or Teams or other platforms. So we're becoming, and I'm not keen on using all of these trendy words, but I'm going to become more agile, and we've been able to pivot and been able to get our programs as accessible as possible to a broader range of people. But don't forget, not everyone connects in that way. So in terms of the trend might be a risk for how we actually connect in with people with disabilities, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, people who don't enjoy the medium of online. You know, that face-to-face connection is very human, and is something that we should be acutely aware of, that we, you know, try and maintain and keep developing.
Oh, thanks, Evelyn. That's great. And we can help if anyone at any point, you know, if you don't know how to maybe think differently, or you look at other ways to involve volunteers or your current volunteers, feel free to call us. Like Evelyn said, we are here to help with that as well. So.
Yeah. And one of the great things that we have in both the South Australia and the Northern Territory are our peer networks, and they're run by, as I mentioned just a minute ago, the Local Government Volunteer Managers Network. But there, you know, there's networks in the Territory and across South Australia in different regions. And that peer support is just quite incredible. And not every sector has that. So the fact that we can all learn from each other and support each other and grow and try to be the best we can be with that peer networking, I think is just a wonderful thing. And if you're not connected in with those networks, again, get in touch, because we can connect you in wherever you are. And most of them are online now, or have an online ability. So they're accessible to everyone.
Absolutely. And we've got the Central Metropolitan Adelaide next week. So please email me if you don't already receive that information. But a really good point, Evelyn. Just one more question before we open it up to the group. I can see we've got 5 in our box ready to go. But what research have we seen this year, I guess, as a result of some of these changes, and what's been happening that's really relevant to the sector?
Yep. So just bear with me just again for another screen share. What we've got is a couple of, one particular excellent piece of research, which has been done by the Australian National University and commissioned by Volunteering Australia. And that was done earlier this year. And it's really around, and this is the whole paper, and we obviously go through it, but you know, the paper is around what's happened to volunteering programs and volunteers at the beginning of the pandemic. And so in this research paper, which is also on the Volunteering Australia website, it shows, you know, figures by, and I'm just going to go through it quickly, figures by state and territory. Here's a really interesting graph. For example, the percentage of volunteers who reported they'd stopped volunteering since the spread of COVID, by sex and by age. And then we've got that by state and territory as well. So interestingly, the Northern Territory had lower numbers of people's programs stopping, but don't forget, look at their wonderful, you know, figures around COVID. They were very much in a very different situation in the Territory to, let's say, Victoria. But all of the others are very, very consistent in the number of people who reported that they had stopped volunteering. Now, this was back in April and May. There hasn't been any further research, but we know, don't we, Emily, anecdotally, and others on the webinar will know, that not every program has been reinstated in the same way or at all. And some volunteers, we've even got volunteers ourselves that haven't come back because of their own personal circumstances and situation. And so the world is not the same as it was. And one of the things that we didn't sort of talk about this before, but in terms of those risks and trends, where will Australia be if those people that used to volunteer don't start volunteering again? What are the unintended consequences of that for our own civil society and people's active citizenship, but also their own mental health and well-being and community connectedness? So these are things that will have to be, and I will have to be kept on. The other thing that's been happening in terms of COVID is, position papers on Volunteering Australia's website under submissions. There's been a number of position papers around insurance. Well, there's been one around insurance, but a number of other papers around matters relating to volunteering and what's been going on this year with bushfires, but also with COVID. So all of the state and territory peaks contribute to that work. And of course, we reach out to our members in the sector for that absolutely critical information that everybody holds at the grassroots level, the impact on programs and on people that we can then feed up. So I do commend the Volunteering Australia website as well for looking at different research and position papers that are there.
Thanks, Evelyn. I think that's been really useful to hear some of that insight into what goes on at those levels and conversations, research, and to hear from you today. So it's been brilliant. Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, great to hear from you, and I think people value that. So we've got about 5 questions by the looks in our Q&A. So feel free to add any if you like. But the first one is, can you leave quarantine or just isolation if a life's at risk?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I only read the advice very briefly this morning, so I do recommend people look up SA Health and get the definitive response to that question. If that question is not answered, please get in touch with myself or Emily, and we will follow up and feed it in and try and get the answer.
And maybe check with SA Police as well, I reckon, on something like that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That all of, the good thing is that consistency of information, whether you go to sa.gov.au, SA Health, DHS, wherever you go, that information is consistent. The same in the Northern Territory. The Northern Territory information is consistent for the Northern Territory. So when people are sharing that, they're generally, and I think that's the right thing to do, sending you the links to that information, because that is where the most accurate government advice is.
Great, thank you. What is the cost of the face mask? Well, we'll send you that information. So
they're free.
They're free. The one, that's right, for what Evelyn was talking about earlier. So that one, and we'll send you the link to that. The next one, yes, you can share the link for today with someone who wasn't registered to attend. We'll be sending that out. Yeah. And how do we manage an influx of volunteers? And then maybe so the second one, another one as well, is how to manage interest to volunteer in COVID time, relevant discussion. We've had lots of interest in volunteering, particularly as roles are mostly outdoors. However, our capacity to recruit, manage and train has been impacted by tight budgets, resources, and just getting by. We've had limited capacity to grow and deliver all the support and services to our existing volunteers. So disappointment from applicants, and also less celebration of our volunteers. Not all volunteer programs are back too. So how to manage an influx and how to also continue that support for current volunteers.
Look, it is very difficult because, one of the really critical things we've become really good at doing in Australia is managing volunteering programs and volunteers safely and effectively. So, it's really looking at your own program and determining, and with your funding obligations, if you're funded by an external source to deliver services or KPIs or outcomes, you have to really look at, can you deliver them? What resources do you need to deliver them? And can you, if you have to pick up and build that surge capacity, can you do it safely and effectively? And unfortunately, corners are sometimes cut. And we've been, again, very lucky that, we haven't had very many detrimental, very few detrimental cases where something has gone wrong in those times where you've had to do something quickly and make a decision to, build your surge capacity. But I think stick to your principles. Stick to your principles of safe and effective volunteering, and what does that look like? One of the things we've had to do, just to put it out there, we haven't been able to deliver all of what our contractual agreements were for the period 2019-2020 with our government funders. So we went back to them and said, we just haven't, because, you know, some of our support was for people in aged care, or, you know, working in aged care. Well, we all know that what happened with COVID is nobody was allowed into residential aged care facilities, so volunteers weren't able to support. We weren't able to support those programs, and therefore we can't meet our KPIs. That's just one example. So we've had to communicate with government, and they have been extraordinarily good at being flexible in what we can deliver, and whether we can carry over funds. Sometimes it's a matter of talking to your CEO, your managers, but also to your funders around those expectations. People have been so accommodating and understanding of the changing world that we're living in.
And so, I think,
and we can talk through individual examples. Please feel free to ring in, and we can support.
And you can say no. You know, I think people have a fear that when people are offering that help, that you have to take every single volunteer that expresses interest with your organisation. But like Evelyn said, go back to what you're trying to achieve. You might need to do some promo on your social media and your website saying, currently not recruiting for volunteers due to the impacts of COVID. You know, maybe put the messaging out there and be proactive. The other thing is, if you do get that influx, refer them back to our website and say, you know, Volunteering SA&NT has other roles advertised throughout South Australia and the Northern Territory for people. So, you know, whilst you might not be able to accommodate their needs in your own organisation, please refer them on to us and other organisations that may be looking for volunteers.
Yeah, that's a really critical point, because it can get inundated, and particularly if your organisation is one of those with a very strong brand or strong brand recognition. People will go to what they know and they trust in the first instance, and also if they know of your good work, they'll know that you want to build that and continue that. And if you have no roles, there's no point in taking somebody on if you haven't got, I don't think, to have fulfilling work for them that can't be done safely and effectively.
Absolutely.
So, you know, please forward them back to all of the volunteer support services that are available, ourselves, and in South Australia, Northern Volunteering, Southern Volunteering, and Limestone Coast Volunteer Resource Centre. But also councils also have often, you know, points of connection for organisations that are looking for volunteers. So yeah, spread the love around, and yeah, we're happy to refer people on to
Absolutely. Another question was, do you support training for volunteers? Absolutely, we do. This year we didn't have as many of the online webinars for volunteers, which we have been aware of, but we're currently planning for 2021. So we will look to offer sessions out there online and hopefully maybe face-to-face again, but we also do fee-for-service training for organisations. So if you wanted us to come and run a session with your volunteers, we can tailor it to your needs as well. So yeah, contact us about that.
So just one example, just to add to what you're saying, is around governance training for boards and committees as well. They're often volunteers in the not-for-profit sector, and that is absolutely something that we can do, and we can tailor to your individual organisation's needs. Sometimes it's at the level of information that we provide, that really good, robust, practical information that might be appealing, whereas we know that there's a lot of avenues for governance training, but often that can be quite out of reach financially for people, or the way of looking at that training is around being a company director. Most not-for-profits have board members and committee members, and so sometimes there's a little bit of a misalignment, although, you know, they're great other trainings that are available. So yeah, please feel free to reach out if you think that there's something we can help with governance as well as practical volunteer program management training.
And just the same person, no, we don't actually offer child safe environment training as part of the packages. You might want to talk to a local council, even the education department. And in terms of who particular around training to speak to, you can contact me. So if you call the office and ask to speak to Emily, I oversee the training at the moment. So give us a call. Another question that's come through, are volunteer managers holding face-to-face Christmas or break-up lunches for volunteers this year? I'm sure this will probably be a conversation that might happen at next week's network meeting as well. So I'd encourage you to join that if you can. But I haven't heard a lot yet. I know I guess people are probably playing it a bit by ear at the moment, but have you heard much, Evelyn?
Well, we are.
Yeah, exactly. We're playing ours by ear, that's for sure. And we hope to hold it.
Yes, we've got a plan in place and we're keen to, but ultimately that'll depend on the advice given by government. It would be great if we can maintain all of the distancing that's required, but still see people face to face. I don't think there's anything that compares to that connectivity. The stuff that you pick up beyond a screen is really critical, and it's been a tough year. So it would be great. I've just noticed that something's come through about the training, Emily, about the child safe environments.
Yes. Yes, so DHS is a place to go to get information, the department to contact in terms of government for that child safe environment. We also don't, someone's asked about first aid or manual handling, that's not our area either, but because ours is more specifically about like volunteer involvement and management. If you are a member of our organisation, there is, if we're tailoring your training, there will be still a fee, but you get a discount if you're a member. But we can talk to you about that, and we put together a quote for you. I think that.
And in terms of that first aid training and also other training that we don't specifically deliver, we can connect you in with organisations that do and are accredited to do so. And one of the things that's been happening for some people in the community home support program area, of course, is that mandating of delivering first aid training to client-facing volunteers who deliver client-facing work. So that's one of the things that Volunteering SA&NT advocates on the behalf of the sector. You know, when things, policy decisions are made by government, we always feed in your voice around those decisions, and that's a really critical component of our work.
We've just had someone email with, ask a few questions. So this will probably be the last of our questions. So we've got, what are the main challenges to be a volunteer? What are the main differences in the various ethnic volunteering groups in respect to people's retention? What is the cycle of an effective volunteer? Are we effectively in SA providing an induction to volunteers that fully describes what's expected of them? Well, we actually have a training tomorrow about induction and orientation if you wish to join us. And is it really any volunteering group fully unpaid that can be used as a role model in SA?
I think that they are extraordinarily good questions and ones we can't answer in a minute, but maybe we do an actual session on some of those questions because I think they're really good. And I would like to say that through the volunteering strategy for South Australia, and if you haven't found out about that, a four-way partnership between the state government, Volunteering SA&NT, Business SA and Local Government Association of South Australia. We're just in the process of developing an online survey for both volunteers and volunteer involving organisations around their volunteering experiences, so we can collect some pertinent up-to-date data. So if you don't get our newsletter, I do encourage you to sign up for that because there'll be information shared there about where the survey will be publicly available. Because with that data, we'll be able to look at different ways that we can support the sector. Now, if you're not connected into the volunteering strategy for South Australia, I noted that Daniela Noffi is on the webinar at the moment, but you can get in touch with Daniela at DHS. There's contact information on the website, Volunteering Strategy for South Australia, or get in touch with Volunteering SA&NT. But great work going on with the volunteering strategy, and I'm so proud that we have a mechanism in South Australia where we can all work together to achieve mutually compatible goals to grow and support volunteering. It is a unique situation here in SA.
Absolutely. I think that takes us pretty much to a close. Firstly, thank you so much, Evelyn, for sharing your knowledge. I think it just goes without saying how much insight you have, and it's really beneficial for us all to hear. So thank you.
Complete pleasure.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that people from the Territory are online. We really do want to get as much information and support to you as we can. If there's anything that you'd like us to do, particularly for the Northern Territory, please let us know. But we have people that work and live up in the Territory that are there to support you. And it's really critical to say that, because often, because I'm based in SA, sometimes the focus tends to be a little bit more SA. So I just really wanted to say that out loud. Thank you in the NT for all you're doing. And thank you also everyone in SA. And happy International Volunteer Day coming up on the 5th of December, the United Nations recognised day for everyone to really give a shout out and say thank you to your volunteers.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us and for sending your questions through, and hopefully you found it useful. We do have another session coming up on the 9th of December, guest speaker to be confirmed, but watch this space. Again, it will be talking with experts from the sector that we come across and that you can ask questions again and chat to and hopefully find it useful. But feel free to email us, contact us if you have any further questions. We've saved the chat and we'll send you through the resources, and we'll let you know once the link has been uploaded as well for you to access and share with your networks and colleagues.
So stay safe, everyone, and take care and keep cool.
Stay safe. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.